The air inside the Onyx room was not merely recycled, it was curated. It smelled of aged mahogany, melting beeswax candles, the metallic tang of chilled Ostrak caviar, and the heavy, cloying scent of desperation masked by Chanel No. 5. To the 300 patrons currently seated in Chicago's most impenetrable subterranean supper club, the atmosphere was one of effortless exclusion. But to Zoya, it smelled like a kill box. She adjusted the collar of her starched white shirt, the fabric scratching slightly against her neck, a grounding sensation she needed. To the rest of the room, she was a non-entity, a silhouette encased in a pressed black waistcoat and a pencil skirt, blending seamlessly into the dark paneling and velvet drapes. She was part of the furniture, less significant than the baccarat crystal chandelier suspended overhead, which hummed with a low-frequency electricity that grated against her spine. Zoya moved through the room with the practiced, fluid grace of a phantom, carrying a silver tray with a bottle of 2015 Romanée-Conti Pinot Noir balanced perfectly in the center. Her steps were silent, absorbed by the plush crimson carpet, her breathing regulated to a slow, rhythmic cadence. 4 counts in, 4 counts hold, 4 counts out. Her left hand rested deceptively idle behind the small of her back, hovering mere inches from the handle of a ceramic, non-metallic knife strapped to her thigh. It was a Kyocera blade, invisible to metal detectors, sharper than surgical steel, and currently the only thing separating her from being just another victim in the massacre she knew was coming. Zoya wasn't a waitress. She was a cleaner, a ghost, a myth whispered about in the darkest corners of the underworld, known only as the Silencer. She didn't leave fingerprints, she didn't leave witnesses, and she definitely didn't leave trails. But tonight, the trail had been laid out for her, leading straight to Table 4. Table 4 was the center of the universe in the Onyx room. It was positioned in a semi-private alcove, backed by bulletproof glass that offered a distorted view of the aquarium wall behind it. Seated there, like a bored king surveying a kingdom he had long since conquered and grown weary of, was Kim Tae-hyun. Tae-hyun, the ruthless head of the Korean Mafia's Midwest faction, was a study in dangerous stillness. He was devastatingly handsome, with high, sharp cheekbones and a jawline that could cut glass, but his beauty was the kind that warned you not to touch. He wore a bespoke 3-piece suit cut from midnight blue Italian wool, the fabric shimmering slightly under the candlelight. He radiated a cold, magnetic power that kept the other diners glancing in his direction with a mixture of lust, envy, and terrified reverence. He sat with one arm draped over the back of his velvet chair, swirling a glass of 30-year-old Glengoyne Scotch, staring into the amber vortex as if reading the future, or perhaps remembering the past. He looked like a man who had everything, and consequently had nothing left to fear. He was wrong. Across from him sat his second-in-command, a man named Junho. The contrast between the two men was stark enough to be painful. Where Tae-hyun was a statue of composure, Junho was a bundle of nervous energy masked by loud bravado. He was wearing a suit that was slightly too shiny, a watch that was slightly too large, and a smile that was entirely too wide. His eyes, beady and restless, darted toward the kitchen service door every 30 seconds. Zoya had been tracking his vitals from across the room for the last 20 minutes. His carotid artery was pulsing visibly against his collar. He was sweating, despite the climate-controlled cool of the room. Zoya's contract was simple, brutal, and precise. Slit Kim Tae-hyun's throat in the VIP restroom before the second course of Wagyu beef arrives. Make it look like a rival triad hit. Exit through the loading dock. The payment had been wired in untraceable Monero, the instructions encrypted in a one-time read file. It was standard. It was routine. But Zoya hadn't survived 10 years in this brutal business by following instructions blindly. She survived by noticing the microscopic details that others missed. She survived by listening to the silence between the noise. She noticed that the busboy, A nervous kid with acne scars she hadn't seen on the staff rota before had a bulky, unnatural shape under his jacket near his ribs. It moved stiffly when he bent down to clear plates. That wasn't a wallet, and it certainly wasn't a wine key. It was the blocky outline of a subcompact firearm, likely a Glock 19 or 26. She noticed the hostess, usually a chirpy woman named Sarah who flirted with the coat-check boy, was pale, trembling, and had locked the heavy oak front doors 5 minutes ago. Zoya had heard the deadbolt slide home, a final, damning click that sealed the tomb. And most damning of all, she noticed Junho checking his watch, a Patek Philippe that he likely bought with skimmed profits, synchronized perfectly with the two large men standing stiffly by the emergency exit. They weren't drinking. They weren't eating. They were waiting. The realization had hit Zoya like a physical blow in the pantry 10 minutes ago. This wasn't just a hit, it was a coup. A bloody, theatrical changing of the guard. The realization brought with it a second, colder truth. The cleaner is always the first loose end to be cut. If Zoya killed Taehyun now, as per her contract, she wouldn't be walking out of the Onyx room. She was the patsy, the convenient assassin who would be gunned down by the heroic second-in-command, Junho, who would then claim the throne while theatrically mourning his fallen boss. The headlines would write themselves, "Loyal lieutenant avenges boss, kills assassin." She was being set up to die right alongside the target, her body just another prop in Junho's ascent to power. Rage, cold and sharp as the blade on her thigh, flooded her veins. Zoya hated sloppy work. She hated amateurs. But more than anything, she hated being played. Her mind, honed by years of tactical warfare and espionage, began to race through scenarios. Angles of fire, exit velocities, body counts. The room was a kill box, but every box had a lid. She just had to find the leverage to pry it open. She checked the time on the discreet digital watch inside her wrist. 8:42 p.m. The Wagyu was scheduled for 8:45 p.m. She had 3 minutes, 180 seconds before the trap sprung. She picked up the silver tray. The bottle of Romani Conti felt heavy, a glass bludgeon if necessary. She began the long walk to table 4. Every step was a calculation. She placed one heel in front of the other, measuring the distance like a tightrope walker, letting the ambient jazz wash over her. She focused on Taehyun. He was the variable. If he was as smart as his dossier said, educated at Oxford, trained in martial arts in Seoul, hardened by street wars in Busan, he would know something was off. But arrogance was a blinder, and men like him were often blinded by their own invincibility. She arrived at the table. The conversation stopped. Or rather, Junho stopped talking. Taehyun hadn't been speaking at all. "The Pinot Noir, sir," Zoya said. Her voice was a masterpiece of disguise, a soft, unremarkable alto, stripped of any accent, designed to be forgotten the moment it was heard. It was the voice of a servant, invisible and obedient. Junho waved a hand dismissively, not even looking at her. "Just pour it, and be quick. We have business to discuss." His voice was tight, the bravado cracking at the edges. Zoya moved to Taehyun's right side. She uncorked the bottle with a fluid twist of her wrist, the sound of the cork popping lost in the din of the restaurant. She poured a small amount into his glass for the tasting. The crimson liquid swirled against the crystal. Taehyun didn't look up. He stared at the wine, then slowly lifted his eyes to Junho. "You seem anxious, brother," Taehyun said. His voice was a low baritone, smooth like gravel tumbled in a river. It carried a weight that made the air around the table feel heavier. "Is the air conditioning insufficient?" "I'm fine, boss. Just eager for the main course," Junho stammered, checking his watch again. 8:43 p.m. Zoya knew she had to act. Now. She stepped into Taehyun's personal space to pour the full glass. The violation of social boundaries was deliberate. She moved closer than a server ever should, her hip brushing the edge of the tablecloth near his arm. The scent of him hit her, sandalwood, expensive tobacco, and the metallic tang of gun oil that no cologne could fully mask. Taehyun's head snapped up. His eyes met hers. For a moment, the world stopped spinning. The jazz faded. The chatter of the diners turned to static. There was only the connection between her eyes and his. His eyes were obsidian, endless and terrifyingly intelligent. They weren't the eyes of a mark. They were the eyes of a predator who had just sensed a disturbance in the wind. He looked at her, really looked at her, dissecting the waitress facade in a nanosecond. He saw the calluses on her knuckles that makeup couldn't hide. He saw the balance in her stance. He saw the lack of fear. For a split second, the predator in him recognized the predator in her. This wasn't the gaze of a servant worried about tips. It was the gaze of an executioner deciding whether to swing the axe or grant a pardon. Zoya held his gaze. She didn't blink. She let her mask slip just a fraction, revealing the steel beneath. "See me," she commanded silently. "See what I am." With a sleight of hand that would have made a Vegas magician weep with envy, Zoya didn't reach for the water pitcher to rinse the glass. Her hand moved over his coaster in a blur of motion. She slid a folded white cocktail napkin under his heavy crystal glass. The ink on the underside was still wet, the blue ballpoint stark against the white paper. She held his gaze for one heartbeat, 2, 3. It was an eternity. If he shouted, she was dead. If he reached for his weapon, she would have to kill him and take her chances with the guards. Taehyun puffned. It was a microscopic movement, a tiny crease between his eyebrows. His eyes flicked down to the napkin, then back to her. Confusion shifted to razor-sharp calculation. He realized she was communicating. Zoya bowed deeply, the picture of subservience, and retreated. But she didn't go far. She moved into the shadows near the service station, turning her back on the most dangerous man in Chicago, putting her life in his hands. Taehyun sat frozen. He felt the paper beneath his fingertips, shielding his movements with his body, blocking Junho's line of sight with his broad shoulders. He slid the note into his lap and unfolded it. The note didn't beg for help. It didn't apologize. It was a business counteroffer, scrawled in urgent, jagged script that screamed of adrenaline. The busboy has a Glock. Junho locked the exits. "I was hired to kill you, but they plan to kill me too. $5 million and I get us both out. Not if we have a deal, or die in 30 seconds. Taehyun stared at the words. The busboy. The locked doors. Yonho is svet. The pieces of the puzzle clicked together with a horrifying, elegant finality. He had suspected Junho was skimming profits, perhaps planning a move in a year or two. But this, tonight, the audacity was breathtaking. He looked up across the table. Junho was smiling now, a skeletal rictus of anticipation. "The beef is coming, boss. It's going to be exquisite." Taehyun felt a cold, dark amusement unfurl in his chest. Betrayal was a familiar flavor, bitter and metallic, but this specific vintage was surprising. He looked toward the shadows where the waitress, the assassin, stood. She was watching him. Her posture was relaxed, but he could see the tension in her quadriceps, the way her hand hovered near her skirt. She was a coiled spring waiting to snap. He had 30 seconds. To die like a fool, betrayed by his brother, or to trust the woman who had been sent to end him. Taehyun lifted his glass of Pinot Noir. The light caught the deep red liquid, making it look like blood. He swirled it gently, watching Junho's eyes track the movement. He brought the glass to his lips, the scent of berries and earth filling his nose, and took a slow, deliberate sip. Then, looking directly into the darkness where Zoya stood, he gave the slightest, almost imperceptible nod. It was a movement, so small it could have been a reaction to the burn of the alcohol. But to Zoya, it was a binding contract sealed in blood and gunpowder. The deal was struck. Zoya's hand closed around the neck, of a heavy magnum of Dom Perignon on the waiter's station. The time for serving was over. The time for butchery had begun. The nod was microscopic, a mere dip of the chin, but it hit the air with the force of a gavel striking a death sentence. Zoya didn't hesitate. Hesitation was a luxury of the living, and right now, everyone in the Onyx room was effectively dead until proven otherwise. Her fingers, callous and strong, clamped around the neck of the magnum of Dom Perignon sitting on the service station. It wasn't a celebration, it was a bludgeon. With a torque generated from her hips, channeling the kinetic energy of a discus thrower, she launched the heavy green bottle across the room. It spiraled through the candlelit air, a deadly emerald missile disrupting the golden haze of the dining room. Time seemed to warp, stretching into a slow-motion tableau. Taehyun watched the bottle fly, his eyes tracking its trajectory with cold appreciation. Junho was still smiling, his lips peeled back over his teeth, oblivious to the fact that his coup had just been intercepted. The bottle connected. It slammed into the side of the busboy's skull just as his hand reached the lapel of his jacket. The sound was sickening, a wet, dense crunch of heavy glass meeting temporal bone, followed instantly by the shattering of the bottle. Champagne exploded in a frothy white geyser, spraying diamonds of liquid and glass across the pristine tablecloths of tables 5 and 6. The busboy didn't scream. His lights simply went out. He crumpled sideways, his hidden Glock 19 clattering onto the parquet floor, spinning uselessly. For a heartbeat, silence reigned, a vacuum created by sheer shock. The diners froze, forks suspended halfway to mouths, conversations severed mid-syllable. Then, chaos bloomed. "Gun!" someone screamed, and the spell broke. Junho surged to his feet, knocking his heavy velvet chair backward. His face transformed from smug satisfaction to rictus terror. "What the?" He grabbed for his holster, his movements clumsy, fueled by panic rather than training. Taehyun moved. He didn't go for a weapon. He didn't have one yet. He went for cover. With a roar that sounded more beast than man, he kicked upward against the heavy oak table. The slab of wood, weighed down with crystal and silver, flipped into the air. Plates of unfinished appetizers slid off, crashing into the floor as the table landed on its side, creating a makeshift barricade between Taehyun and the room. Thwack, thwack, thwack. Bullets began to chew up the upholstery of the booth where Taehyun had been sitting a millisecond prior. The two men by the emergency exit had drawn their weapons, compact submachine guns, H&K MP5KS, concealable but devastating. They were spraying the alcove, unconcerned with collateral damage. The aquarium wall behind the booth shattered. Hundreds of gallons of salt water and exotic fish cascaded down, washing over the expensive carpet, turning the floor into a swamp of glass and dying angelfish. Zoya was already moving. She was a blur of black and white against the mahogany. "Get down!" she roared to a pair of elderly patrons as she vaulted over the marble bar top. She didn't land gracefully. She landed tactically, sliding on her knees behind the heavy brass rail. Her hands flew to the underside of the ice well. There, taped securely with black gaffer tape, were her insurance policies, 2 suppressed Sig Sauer P2-26 pistols. She ripped them free, the sound of the tape tearing lost in the cacophony of screams and gunfire. She racked the slides simultaneously, a dual metallic clack-clack that felt like a heartbeat in her palms. She popped up from behind the bar. This was her domain now. The silencer was online. She took a breath, locked her elbows, and fired. Fut-fut, fut-fut. The shots were quiet, polite almost, compared to the roaring staccato of the MP5S. But they were infinitely more effective. The first gunman by the emergency exit jerked backward, a neat hole appearing in the center of his forehead. He dropped without a sound. The second gunman spun, trying to acquire the new threat, but Zoya was already adjusting her aim. 2 shots to the chest, 1 to the head. The Mozambique drill. He collapsed into the shattered remains of the hostess stand. "Kitchen!" Zoya yelled, her voice cutting through the din. She wasn't asking. She was commanding. Taehyun heard her. He was crouched behind the overturned table, debris raining down on him. He grabbed a steak knife that had fallen from the table, a serrated blade with a bone handle. It was primitive, but in his hands it was lethal. He looked at Junho, who was cowering beneath a neighboring table, clutching his phone, trying to dial for backup. "You missed your window, brother," Taehyun hissed. He lunged, not to kill, not yet, but to move. He scrambled toward the kitchen service doors, staying low, moving like a panther through the underbrush of broken furniture and terrified socialites. A third gunman emerged from the main entrance, sweeping the room. Taehyun didn't break stride. He threw the steak knife. It rotated once, a silver blur, and buried itself in the gunman's thigh. The man screamed and dropped to one knee, his aim faltering. Zoya provided the finish. But the gunman fell silent. Taehyun reached the swinging kitchen doors, just as Zoya slid across the blood-slicked floor to meet him. They collided in a tangle of adrenaline and momentum, pressing their backs against the wall beside the doorframe as bullets splintered the wood where their heads had been seconds ago. Taehyun looked at her, really looked at her. Her hair had come loose from its severe bun, framing a face that was fierce, focused, and terrifyingly beautiful. She smelled of gunpowder and expensive wine. "You're expensive," he shouted over the deafening noise, a breathless laugh escaping his lips. It was an absurd thing to say in the middle of a firefight, but the adrenaline was making everything vivid, hyper-real. "I'm worth it," Zoya shot back, ejecting a magazine and slamming a fresh one home with a fluid, practiced motion. "And the price just went up. You're bleeding." He touched his cheek. His fingers came away wet and red. A shard of glass from the aquarium had grazed him, slicing a clean line across his cheekbone. He looked at the blood, then at the woman, the assassin, who was currently reloading to save his life. "Lead the way," he said. "Cover your ears," she warned. Zoya kicked the kitchen doors open and dove through, rolling to a crouch. Taehyun followed instantly. The kitchen was a different world. If the dining room was calm luxury turned chaotic, the kitchen was an industrial hellscape. Steam rose in thick clouds from massive stock pots. Flames licked up from gas ranges. A dozen chefs in white coats were frozen in various states of panic, knives hovering over cutting boards, eyes wide. "Move! Everyone out! Go!" Zoya screamed, waving her weapon toward the side exit. The chefs didn't need to be told twice. They scattered like roaches when the lights turn on, abandoning stations, dropping pans, fleeing toward the alleyway. But the kitchen wasn't empty of threats. The back door, the loading dock entrance, burst open. The winter wind howled in, followed by 3 men in heavy tactical gear. These weren't the suit-wearing thugs from the front. These were the heavy hitters. They carried assault rifles and wore body armor. Junho's Plan B. "Down!" Zoya shoved Taehyun behind a stainless steel prep counter just as the air filled with the deafening roar of 5.56mm rounds. Metal sparked and pinged as bullets punched through pots and pans, sending showers of hot grease and water everywhere. Zoya popped up, fired 2 suppression shots, and ducked back down. "They're wearing Class 4 armor," she hissed. "My 9s won't punch through center mass." "We need a distraction," Taehyun said, his eyes scanning the room. He spotted it. On the industrial range to their left, a 60-gallon tilt skillet was bubbling with boiling veal stock. "Cover me," Taehyun ordered. "Are you insane? Just shoot." Zoya rose, exposing herself to fire, and unleashed a rapid volley at the gunmen's heads. They flinched, ducking behind the doorframe for a split second. That second was all Taehyun needed. He lunged for the tilt skillet. He grabbed the release lever and the handle, ignoring the searing heat radiating from the metal. With a roar of exertion, He yanked the heavy iron basin downward. A tidal wave of boiling, brown liquid surged across the floor. It hit the gunman at shin level, soaking into boots and pants, splashing up toward waists. The heat was instantaneous and horrific. The gunman screamed, a primal, ragged sound that cut through the gunfire. The boiling liquid scalded skin through fabric, turning the tactical advantage of the doorway into a bottleneck of agony. They slipped on the greasy, slick floor, falling into the scalding puddle, their weapons clattering away. "Move! Now!" Taehyun grabbed Zoya's arm. They sprinted past the writhing men, slipping on the stalk, aiming for the dry storage pantry at the far end of the kitchen. "The loading dock is burned," Zoya panted as they slammed the heavy pantry door and engaged the deadbolt. "They'll have a sniper covering the alley. Then we are trapped," Taehyun said, looking around the small room lined with shells of rice, flour, and canned tomatoes. "This door won't hold for long." "We aren't trapped," Zoya said, holstering one pistol and stepping onto a sack of 50-pound jasmine rice. She reached up to the ceiling, pushing aside a loose acoustic tile. Above it lay darkness and the hum of machinery. "We're going up. The ventilation—" Taehyun looked at the narrow opening dubiously. "I'm 6'2". I won't fit. It's the main exhaust for the industrial ovens. It's wide enough. Just don't get stuck, or I'll leave you behind," she lied. She wouldn't leave him, not until the check cleared. "After you," he said. "No, you go first. I cover the rear." She grabbed his waist, his expensive, blood-spattered suit jacket bunching under her hands, and shoved him upward. "Climb!" Taehyun pulled himself up, his muscles straining. The metal ductwork groaned under his weight. He scrambled into the darkness, breathing in the scent of old grease and dust. He turned back, reaching a hand down. Zoya took it. His grip was iron-strong. He hauled her up, just as the pantry door began to splinter under the impact of a battering ram. She slid the ceiling tile back into place, plunging them into absolute darkness, save for the thin beams of light cutting through the seams of the ductwork. They lay there for a moment, chest to chest in the cramped metal tunnel, breathing raggedly. The adrenaline was still spiking, making their hearts hammer in a frantic rhythm that seemed to sync up in the silence. "You smell like grease," Taehyun whispered, the ghost of a laugh in his voice. "And you smell like a target," Zoya whispered back, wiping sweat from her forehead. "Keep moving. North. This shaft dumps out 3 blocks away." As they began to crawl through the grime of the ventilation shaft, elbows and knees banging against the metal, Taehyun watched the silhouette of the woman in front of him. He saw the way she moved, efficient, relentless. He had expected a savior, maybe, or a hired gun, but he realized, with a jolt that had nothing to do with the gunfire, that he hadn't just hired an assassin. He had unleashed a force of nature. And for the first time in 10 years, the terrifying Kim Taehyun felt something akin to hope. Or maybe it was just the thrill of the hunt. "Zoya," he said, testing the name she hadn't given him yet, but which he would learn soon enough. "Quiet," she hissed. "Sound travels." They crawled on, leaving the wreckage of his empire behind, moving toward the cold Chicago night and a future that had suddenly become very, very expensive. The exit was neither graceful nor dignified. The ventilation shaft ended abruptly 3 blocks east of the Onyx Room, jutting out of a brick facade in a forgotten alleyway choked with dumpsters and frozen slush. Zoya kicked the grate loose with a metallic clang that echoed dangerously in the silence. It fell into the snow, followed immediately by Zoya herself. She landed in a crouch, her boots crunching through the layer of ice crusting the trash bags, scanning the perimeter instantly. "Clear," she hissed, though the word was snatched away by the wind. Taehyun tumbled out after her. He landed heavily, his expensive Italian leather shoes slipping on the slick pavement. He caught himself against the brick wall, ruining the left sleeve of his jacket on a patch of grime. He stood up, chest heaving, and brushed himself off with a frantic, aggressive motion, as if he could wipe away the indignity of the last 20 minutes along with the grease stains. The Chicago winter hit them like a physical blow. The air inside the restaurant had been a balmy, curated 68 degrees. The air in the kitchen had been a tropical hell. Here, in the alley, it was 5 degrees below zero with a wind chill that flayed the skin. The sweat on Tae-hyun's neck froze instantly, sending shivers raking down his spine. "My car," Tae-hyun said, his teeth chattering slightly, though his voice remained authoritative. He pointed north, toward a private parking garage visible down the street. Level 3. Armored Maybach. Heated seats. Weapons in the trunk. "We go." He took a step, but Zoya's hand shot out, clamping around his bicep. Her grip was startlingly strong, immovable like iron. "Use your head, Tae-hyun," she snapped, her eyes darting between the street entrances. Junho locked the front doors. He stationed shooters at the back. "Do you really think he left your getaway car untouched?" Tae-hyun stopped. The adrenaline that had been fueling his flight began to curdle into cold logic. He looked at the parking garage. It loomed like a concrete tomb. "The ignition," he whispered, the realization dawning on him. "Wired to a pressure plate, or the starter," Zoya confirmed, her voice flat. "Or maybe just a C4 charge under the driver's seat. You turn that key, and you become pink mist. Junho doesn't want you escaping. He wants you erased." Tae-hyun looked at her. In the harsh glare of a flickering streetlight, she looked wild and terrifying. Grease smeared her cheek. Her hair was a chaotic halo of curls escaping its pins, and her eyes were scanning the darkness like radar. She was right. Of course she was right. "Then we are on foot," he said, reaching for the pistol tucked into his waistband. "We steal a car. No time. And stolen cars get reported. Police scanners are already lighting up," Zoya said. She reached into the deep pocket of her apron, which she still wore, absurdly, over her tactical gear, and pulled out a set of keys. They weren't the heavy, electronic fob of a luxury vehicle. They were simple, jagged metal keys on a faded keychain shaped like a cat. "We take mine," she said. She turned and marched toward a dark corner of the alley, between two overflowing dumpsters that smelled of rotting fish and frozen garbage. Parked there, almost invisible under a layer of dirty snow and soot, was a car that made Tae-hyun physically recoil. It was a 1998 Honda Civic. Or at least, it had been once. Now, it was a mosaic of rust, primer gray, and a faded blue that looked like a bruise. The rear bumper was held on with duct tape. One hubcap was missing. The exhaust pipe hung low, threatening to scrape the ground. Tae-hyun stared at it. He blinked, snowflakes catching on his eyelashes. "You cannot be serious." "Get in," Zoya ordered, unlocking the driver's side door. It creaked loudly, a groan of rusty metal. "I control the entire drug trade of the Midwest," Tae-hyun stated, his voice rising in disbelief. "I wear suits that cost more than this vehicle's entire production line. I have senators on my payroll. I do not ride in this. You are currently a dead man walking with a bounty on his head and a hole in his empire," Zoya said, leaning over the roof of the car. She looked him dead in the eye. "And this dead man can either get in the bucket, or he can stay here and explain to the hit squad why he's too good for a Honda. Your choice, Your Highness." Sirens wailed in the distance, closer now, accompanied by the distinct thwup-thwup of a police helicopter rotor cutting through the wind. Tae-hyun swore in Korean, a vile curse involving ancestors and livestock, and yanked the passenger door open. He folded his 6'2" frame into the cramped seat, his knees hitting the glove compartment, his shoulder pressing against the cold glass. The car smelled of old coffee and ozone. Zoya slid into the driver's seat. She threw the keys into the ignition and turned them. Tae-hyun braced himself for the wheezing cough of a dying engine. Instead, the car purred. It wasn't the sound of a 4-cylinder economy engine. It was a deep, throaty hum, almost imperceptible but powerful, like a sleeping dragon waking up. The dashboard, which looked like cracked plastic from the outside, suddenly illuminated. But it wasn't the orange glow of 90s analog dials. The entire instrument cluster vanished, replaced by a high-definition digital display. Avionics-grade readouts flickered to life. Tire pressure, oil temperature, police scanner frequencies, thermal imaging of the alley ahead. The center console, which looked like a tape deck, slid back to reveal a touch screen showing an encrypted GPS grid of the city. Tae-hyun stared, mouth slightly open. He touched the window glass. It was thick. Polycarbonate laminate, he murmured. Bulletproof. Level 4 ballistic protection, Zoya corrected, throwing the car into gear. Reinforced chassis. Run-flat tires. The engine is a twin-turbocharged V6 swapped from a Nissan GTR, tuned to 700 horsepower. It looks like a piece of shit, so no one looks twice. It's a sleeper. She slammed her foot on the gas. The Honda didn't accelerate, it teleported. The G-force pinned Tae-hyun against the seat, which, he realized belatedly, was a Recaro racing bucket disguised with a cheap fabric cover. They shot out of the alleyway, the tires gripping the icy asphalt with impossible traction. Zoya drifted the car around a garbage truck, correcting the slide with a microscopic movement of her wrist, and merged onto the arterial road. She drove with a terrifying competence. She didn't speed blindly, she flowed through traffic. She anticipated lane changes, ran red lights only after checking cross-traffic with a glance, and kept to the shadows of the larger trucks. Who hired you? Tae-hyun asked finally, breaking the silence that had settled over the cabin. The heater was blasting now, thawing his frozen hands, but the chill in his gut remained. He watched her profile in the strobing streetlights. The way her hands moved on the wheel, relaxed, lethal, confident, fascinated him. "Does it matter?" she replied, her eyes constantly flicking to the rearview mirror. "The contract is void. My reputation is burned. I just saved the target. I'm officially retired. Probably dead in the eyes of the guild." "Jun-ho," he said, the name tasting like ash. "He didn't hire you. He doesn't have the connections to find someone of your caliber. He hires thugs who spray and pray. You were surgical. Who brokered the deal?" Zoya glanced at him. The digital dashboard cast a blue glow on her face, highlighting the sharp curve of her jaw. "A shell company out of Macau. The Red Dragon Syndicate." Tae-hyun let out a sound that was half laugh, half growl. He leaned his head back against the headrest, closing his eyes. "The Red Dragons? My rivals. Of course. It made perfect sense. Horrifying sense. Jun-ho sold me out to the Chinese triads," he murmured, piecing it together. "He didn't just want the throne. He wanted to sell the kingdom. He knew he couldn't hold the territory against them, so he made a deal. Kill me, hand over the distribution routes, and rule as a puppet king under their protection." He opened his eyes and looked at Zoya. "You realize what you have done. You saved my life, yes, but you also ruined a merger that would have stabilized the entire Midwest underworld. The triads will not be happy. Half the city will be hunting us by morning. My own men who turned, the triad enforcers, the police. That's why we aren't staying in the city," Zoya said calmly, taking a sharp right turn that threw Tae-hyun against the door. She was heading toward the industrial district, toward the highway on ramps. "We're going to my safe house. And before you ask, no, it's not a luxury penthouse with a wine cellar and silk sheets. It's a bunker." "I do not care about silk sheets right now," Tae-hyun said, though he missed them already. "I care about ammunition and leverage." He studied her. She was an enigma. A black woman in a field dominated by Eastern European ex-military and cartel hitmen. She moved like a dancer and killed like a soldier. And she had just thrown away a fortune to save him because, why? Because of a bus boy. Because she hated sloppy work? "What is your name?" he asked softly. He needed to know. He needed to put a label on the force of nature driving a 700-horsepower Honda Civic. Zoya. Zoya. He tasted the name. It sounded Russian. Or Greek. It meant life. Fitting, since she held his in her hands. You said the price was $5 million in the note. That was the get-you-out-of-the-restaurant price, Zoya said, merging onto the I-90 expressway, threading the needle between a semi-truck and a minivan. The keep you alive while the entire criminal underworld hunts us price is negotiable. Taehyun looked at the city skyline receding in the rearview mirror, the glittering lights of the kingdom he had lost in a single hour. He felt a surge of cold, ruthless determination. He would burn it all down to get it back. And he needed a weapon to do it. "If you help me take back my empire," he began, his voice dropping to that low, gravelly timbre that usually made men tremble. "If you help me burn Junho to the ground, slaughter the triad interlopers, and reclaim my seat at the table, I will give you 10 million. Zoya checked her side mirror, spotting a black SUV that had changed lanes 2 cars back. She tapped the touchscreen, bringing up the rearview camera feed. Thermal signatures showed 4 occupants. Heat signatures of weapons on their laps. "We have a tail," she said calmly. "Black Suburban. Triad hit squad." She downshifted. The engine roared, the turbocharger spooling up with a high-pitched whine. "Make it 20, Taehyun," she said, her smile sharp and dangerous in the blue light. "Make it 20 million, and I'll let you pull the trigger on Junho yourself." Taehyun looked at the screen, saw the pursuit vehicle, and then looked at Zoya. He saw the fire in her eyes. She wasn't afraid. She was excited. "Deal," he said. "Hold on," Zoya commanded. She yanked the handbrake. At 80 miles per hour, the Honda spun 180 degrees in the middle of the highway, tires screaming, smoke billowing. For a terrifying second, they were sliding backward down the expressway, facing the oncoming traffic and the pursuing SUV. The triad driver panicked, swerving to avoid a collision. Zoya didn't swerve. She gunned the engine in reverse, steering expertly, then whipped the wheel around, executing a perfect J-turn that spun the car back forward, now in the exit lane that the SUV had just missed. She shot down the off-ramp, leaving the hit squad stranded on the highway, forced to drive to the next exit miles away. Taehyun gripped the dashboard handle, his knuckles white, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. He let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. 20 million, he whispered, staring at her. "You are worth every penny." "I know," Zoya said, her eyes back on the road, scanning for the next threat. "Now shut up and let me drive. We have 40 miles to the safe house, and I need to figure out how to hide a Korean Mafia don in a town where the average demographic is corn farmer. I can blend in," Taehyun said, straightening his tie. Zoya looked at his bespoke suit, his $500 haircut, and the blood smeared on his cheekbone that looked like war paint. "Honey," she deadpanned, "you stand out like a diamond in a pile of coal. We're going to have to do something about that suit." "Don't touch the suit," he warned. "We'll see," she said. "First, we survive the night." The sleeper sped into the darkness, carrying a fallen king and his queen of spades, heading toward a war that would paint the snow red. The safe house wasn't a house. It was a tomb for heavy industry, buried in the skeletal remains of a forest 30 miles outside the city limits. Zoya turned the Honda Civic off the main road onto a gravel track that hadn't seen a paver in 2 decades. The headlights cut through the swirling snow, illuminating ancient pines that crowded the path like sentinels. They drove for another mile into the deep dark, the car's suspension groaning as it navigated potholes deep enough to swallow a wheel. Finally, a massive concrete structure loomed out of the blackness. It was a decommissioned water treatment facility, a brutalist monolith of stained concrete and rusted iron built in the 1970s and forgotten by the municipal maps shortly after. It looked abandoned, desolate, and utterly inhospitable. Home sweet bunker, Zoya muttered, killing the headlights. She tapped a sequence into the car's touchscreen. A heavy steel roller door at the base of the facility shuddered and began to rise, grinding noisily against its tracks. She drove inside. The darkness swallowed them. The interior was a cavernous loading bay, smelling of wet concrete, stagnant water, and the sharp, distinct tang of ozone from high-voltage servers. Zoya parked the car next to a generator that was humming with a steady, rhythmic thrum. As the engine died, silence rushed back in, heavy, oppressive, and cold. Tae-hyun stepped out of the car, his breath misting in the frigid air. He looked around, his eyes adjusting to the dim light provided by emergency sodium bulbs high above. The space was vast, filled with shadows and the ghosts of machinery. "You live here?" he asked, his voice echoing slightly. He sounded appalled, but also impressed by the sheer scale of the fortification. "I exist here," Zoya corrected, grabbing a duffel bag from the trunk. "Living implies I have plants and a cat. I have neither. Come on. The command center is climate-controlled. Unless you want to freeze to death in that three-piece suit." She led him up a metal gantry walkway that rang hollow under their footsteps. They passed massive, empty sedimentation tanks that looked like empty swimming pools for giants. At the top of the walkway was a heavy blast door. Zoya placed her hand on a biometric scanner. A beam of green light swept her palm. The locks disengaged with a series of heavy, reassuring thunks. Inside, the world changed. The command center was a glass-walled observation deck that overlooked the facility floor. It was warm, dry, and lit by the soft, electric blue glow of a massive bank of monitors. Server racks lined the back wall, blinking in frantic patterns. There was a simple cot in the corner, a hot plate, and a table covered in weapons parts. It was the lair of a spider who watched the world through a web of fiber optics. Tae-hyun walked to the glass, looking down at the dark facility below, then turned to the screens. "You have access to the city grid," he noted, seeing the traffic cam feeds. "I have access to everything," Zoya said, dropping the duffel bag on a workbench. "See, that arm is bleeding through your jacket." Tae-hyun looked down. The sleeve of his bespoke midnight blue suit was sodden with blood, the fabric stiffening as it dried. The adrenaline was wearing off, leaving behind a throbbing, searing pain in his bicep where the glass had sliced deep. He sat on a metal stool, shrugging the jacket off with a hiss of pain. He unbuttoned his blood-soaked dress shirt, revealing a torso that was defined by lean, hard muscle, and scarred by a history of violence. Zoya saw the map of his life etched into his skin. A knife wound on his ribs, a bullet pucker on his shoulder, burn marks on his forearm. He wasn't a desk-bound Don. He was a soldier who had climbed the mountain of bodies to the top. She grabbed a first aid kit, a military-grade trauma pack, and snapped on a pair of black nitrile gloves. She didn't offer anesthetic. He didn't ask for it. "This is going to hurt," she said, soaking a gauze pad in iodine. "Do it," he said, staring straight ahead at the wall of screens. She pressed the iodine into the wound. His jaw muscles bunched, a rhythmic spasms of control, but he didn't make a sound. Zoya worked with efficient, brutal tenderness. She cleaned the jagged slice, checking for glass shards, then threaded a curved needle. "You are not just a hitman," he observed, his voice tight but steady, watching her hands. "The way you cleared the room, the way you drive, the way you stitch. You fight like military. Special forces. Intelligence." Zoya didn't look up, her focus entirely on the needle piercing his skin. "Something like that. I didn't exist on paper for a long time. Ghost Squad. Black Ops. We did the jobs the government couldn't admit to, and the military couldn't sanction." She tied off a suture with a snap. "Then I realized patriotism doesn't pay the rent, and my handlers considered me expendable. So I became a private contractor. I decided I wanted to get paid for my skills instead of just used by a flag." Mercenary, he said. Entrepreneur, she corrected. She snipped the thread. There. You'll live. But it will scar. It'll ruin your modeling career. Good, Taehyun said, flexing his arm to test the stitches. The pain was sharp, grounding. It will remind me never to trust anyone again. Except me, Zoya said, standing up and peeling off the gloves. The snap of the rubber sounded loud in the quiet room. Especially you, he countered, looking up at her. His eyes were dark, intense, stripping away her defenses. You are the most dangerous of them all. You betrayed your employer to save the target. That makes you unpredictable. I didn't betray my employer, Zoya said, walking to the monitors. My employer was the contract. The contract was a lie. I don't work for liars. It's bad for longevity. She began typing rapidly on a mechanical keyboard, the clack, clack, clack filling the room. I've tapped into the police scanners and your organization's internal comms. It's worse than we thought. She brought up a localized audio feed. A voice crackled through the speakers, Junho's voice, sounding shaken but authoritative. The triads hit us hard. A coordinated strike. Taehyun is dead. I saw him fall. We must remain strong. I am calling an emergency assembly of the Kapos. Midnight. At the penthouse. We will mourn our leader, and then we will strike back against the Chinese. Taehyun stood up, ignoring the pain in his arm. The vulnerability of the medical moment vanished, replaced instantly by the cold, imperious aura of the Mafia boss. The predator was back. He declares me dead before the body is even cold, Taehyun snarled. He is consolidating power. If the Kapos pledge loyalty to him tonight, my return becomes a civil war. I need to stop the coronation. He's terrified, Zoya analyzed, pointing to a thermal feed of the Onyx Room ruins where police were currently tagging bodies. He knows he didn't see a body. He knows you escaped. He's rushing the timeline to secure the throne before you can resurface. Then we crash the meeting, Taehyun said, walking toward the weapons table. He picked up a disassembled AR-15, his hands moving over the parts with familiarity. We walk in. I shoot him in the face. I remind everyone who is king. Simple. Zoya shook her head, spinning her chair around. Suicide. Pure. Ego-driven suicide. He'll have 50 men there, all loyal to the paycheck he just promised them. He'll be expecting a frontal assault. He'll have the elevators locked down, the stairwells mined, and snipers on the adjacent rooftops. I built that building, Taehyun argued. I know every inch of it. Do you? Zoya challenged. She pulled up a 3D blueprint on the main screen. It was a wireframe model of a 60-story skyscraper in downtown Chicago, Taehyun's fortress. This is your headquarters. The penthouse boardroom. The elevator requires a retina scan and a voice print. Mine. Or Junho's. Exactly, Zoya said. He thinks you're dead, or at least he's selling that story. So the system will be purged of your biometrics, or flagged to trigger a silent alarm if you try to scan in. He'll be the primary admin now. He'll feel safe inside his fortress. She zoomed in on the blueprint, rotating it to show the subterranean levels. But there's a backdoor hardline in the server room, Subbasement 3. It's an analog override for the fire suppression system. If I can get in there, I can bypass the digital lockout. I can override the lockdown protocols. I can seal the building. I can cut the lights, the comms, and the oxygen scrubbers. Taehyun looked at the blueprint, then at her, his eyes narrowing. The sub-basement is a vault. It guards the server farm and the family ledger. It is protected by thermal sensors, pressure plates in the floor, and a laser grid. It is impossible to enter without triggering the alarm. I know, Zoya smirked, a look of supreme, arrogant confidence that made Taehyun's breath hitch. I know it's impossible because I installed them. Taehyun stared at her, genuinely stunned. The layers of this woman seemed infinite. Every time he thought he understood the scope of her capability, she revealed another depth. You worked for my organization before? Under my father. I worked for the highest bidder, Taehyun. 3 years ago, your father wanted the best security system money could buy. He hired a consultant named Anya Petrova. That was me. I designed the grid, and like any good architect, I left a key under the mat. You built a backdoor into my family's fortress, he said, not sure whether to be furious or impressed. I built a backdoor into a fortress owned by criminals, she corrected. Call it job security. Tonight, that backdoor is the only reason you might live to see sunrise. She stood up and walked to a large metal locker against the far wall. She keyed in a code, and the doors hissed open. Inside was an arsenal that would make a SWAT team jealous. Rows of assault rifles, submachine guns, grenades, and black tactical gear. But we can't walk into the sub-basement, Zoya continued, tossing a heavy black combat vest to him. The street level is compromised. The lobby will be a kill zone. The garage is locked down. So how do we get in? Taehyun asked, catching the vest. Teleportation. Gravity, Zoya said. She pulled a black flight suit from the locker. The only blind spot in your air defense system is directly above the helipad, a narrow cone of silence designed to allow your private chopper to land without triggering the anti-drone measures. We take my plane up to 25,000 feet. We halo jump. High altitude, low opening. We land on the roof. We breach the maintenance hatch. I rappel down the elevator shaft to the sub-basement. You take the stairs down to the penthouse level. Taehyun blinked. He looked at the flight suit, then at her. Halo jump. At night. In a snowstorm. It's the last thing they'll expect, Zoya said, stripping off her apron and unbuttoning her waistcoat. She didn't shy away from his gaze. She was changing from the waitress into the soldier, shedding the disguise. Underneath the white shirt, she wore a black compression tank top that highlighted the scars on her shoulders and the definition of her arms. We drop in. I hack the system. I lock the doors. You kill the traitor. Simple. Simple. Taehyun repeated, the word tasting ridiculous. You are insane. I'm effective, she countered. She tossed a pair of combat trousers at him. Put these on. You can't fight a war in Italian wool trousers. They restrict movement. Taehyun looked at the tactical gear. It was black, utilitarian, nameless. It was the uniform of the ghost she was. He looked at his own reflection in the darkened glass of the observation deck, the bloody shirt, the ruined suit, the face of a man who had lost everything in an hour. He began to undress. He stripped off the shirt, the trousers, the expensive leather shoes. He stood there for a moment, stripped of the trappings of his power, just a man with scars and a mission. He pulled on the tactical pants. They fit surprisingly well. He pulled on the combat shirt, the fabric tight and warm. He strapped on the vest, feeling the weight of the ceramic plates over his heart. He felt different, lighter, deadlier. The suit was armor for a boardroom. This was armor for a war. Zoya watched him. There was a shift in the air, a tension that crackled between them. It wasn't just the adrenaline of the planning or the intimacy of the medical triage. It was the recognition of two predators preparing for a hunt. She walked over to him, holding a suppressed 416 Hong Kong dollars assault rifle. She held it out. This is customized, she said. Short barrel. Hair trigger. It bites if you aren't careful. Taehyun took the weapon. It felt like an extension of his arm. He checked the chamber, the action smooth and silent. He looked up at her. They were standing inches apart. He could smell the iodine on her hands and the faint, natural scent of her skin. If we survive this, he said, his voice low, vibrating in the quiet room. If we take back the building. If I kill Junho. Yes, Zoya asked, tilting her head, her eyes locking onto his. I am taking you to dinner, he said. A real dinner. No notes under the table. No flying bottles. No gunfire. Just dinner. Zoya paused. She looked at his lips, then up to his eyes. For the first time, her guard dropped completely. The cynicism vanished, replaced by a flicker of genuine want. That sounds nice, she whispered. Then, the mask slammed back into place. She grinned, sharp and dangerous. But let's survive first, boss. The plane is fueled on the tarmac out back. We have a date with gravity. She turned and walked toward the door leading to the rear hangar. Taehyun watched her go, gripping the rifle. He realized he wasn't just fighting for his empire anymore. He was fighting for that dinner. He followed her into the darkness, ready to fall from the sky. The jump was a silent scream into a frozen void. At 25,000 feet, the air above Chicago was thin, lethal, and 60 degrees below zero. Zoya and Taehyun stood at the edge of the open ramp of the customized Pilatus PC-12 cargo plane Zoya owned. The interior of the plane was unpressurized, the roar of the turboprop engine deafening even through their helmets. They were encased in thermal stealth suits, oxygen masks strapped tight to their faces, looking like obsidian statues against the howling darkness. Below them, the city was a sprawling grid of glittering light, a circuit board waiting to be shorted out. Somewhere in that grid was Taehyun's tower, a needle in a haystack of concrete and steel. Zoya checked Taehyun's harness one last time, her gloved hands moving with practiced efficiency over the buckles and straps. He caught her wrist. Through the dark visor of his helmet, his eyes were intense, alight with a terrifying mixture of fear and exhilaration. He nodded once, the same microscopic nod he had given in the restaurant hours ago. "I trust you," she signaled to the pilot. The green jump light flickered on. They stepped off the edge together. The free fall was brutal. It wasn't flying, it was falling with style. The wind roared past them, a physical force trying to tear them apart. They plummeted through a layer of snow clouds, visibility dropping to zero, ice crystals forming instantly on their visors. Zoya tracked their altitude on her wrist-mounted altimeter, guiding them through the blind descent using GPS beneath the cloud deck. They were aiming for a 60-foot square patch of concrete on top of an 80-story building, while moving at 120 miles per hour in a crosswind. At 2,000 feet, Zoya pulled her ripcord. The black rectangular canopy snapped open above her, the sudden deceleration jerking her violently upward. A second later, Taehyun's chute deployed below her. They descended in tight spirals, ghosts drifting down through the snowstorm. They landed on the helipad within seconds of each other. Taehyun hit the tarmac hard, rolling to disperse the momentum, his tactical training kicking in. Zoya landed with a feather-light touch, instantly cutting away her chute so it wouldn't catch in the high winds. They were on the roof. The fortress was breached. Zoya moved instantly to the maintenance hatch housing the elevator mechanicals. It was secured with a biometric padlock. She didn't bother hacking it. She pulled a small canister of liquid nitrogen from her vest, sprayed the lock until it frosted over, and shattered it with a hammer blow from the butt of her rifle. She threw the hatch open. Below them yawned the elevator shaft, a dark, greasy throat plunging down 80 stories. The cables hummed with tension. The air smelled of ozone and hydraulic fluid. "This is where we split," Zoya said, her voice distorted by the helmet comms. She hooked a rappelling line to a structural I-beam. "I go down the rabbit hole. Sub-basement 3. The server room. You take the stairs. Penthouse level. Wait for my signal." Taehyun grabbed her shoulder. The contact was bulky through layers of Kevlar, but the intention was clear. "If you get caught down there, Zoya, the thermal defense system will incinerate you." She looked at him through her visor. "I designed the incinerator, Taehyun. I know where the cool spots are. Just be ready. When the lights go red, the building is ours." She didn't wait for a reply. She stepped backward off the ledge and dropped into the darkness, disappearing silently down the shaft. Taehyun watched her go, a surge of profound respect warring with anxiety in his chest. Then, he turned to the roof access door. He ghosted down the stairs, moving silently past the 79th, 78th, 77th floors. He stopped on the landing above the penthouse level. He could hear voices drifting up from the mahogany double doors of his own boardroom. He crept closer, pressing his ear to the wood. A tragic, unforeseen ambush, Junho's voice was saying, smooth like poison honey. Taehyun fought bravely, but the triad hit squad was overwhelming. I barely escaped with my life. We must honor his memory by securing the alliance he died trying to forge. The Chinese demand territory, but they offer protection. We must be pragmatic. Taehyun's grip on his 416 Hong Kong dollars tightened until the metal bit into his gloves. The lies were sickening. Junho was selling the empire piece by piece, standing at the head of the table where Taehyun should have been, wearing a crown he hadn't earned. Do it, Zoya, Taehyun thought, his whole body vibrating with lethal intent. Burn it down. 60 floors below, Zoya hung upside down by her knees from a conduit pipe in the sub-basement ceiling. She was hovering 3 feet above the floor of the corridor leading to the server room. The air here was frigid, super cool to protect the massive server racks. The floor looked empty, just polished concrete. But through the special IR lenses in her goggles, Zoya could see the laser grid, a complex web of burning red light blocking the path. And beneath the concrete were pressure plates sensitive enough to detect a mouse. She took a breath, visualizing the pattern she had coded 3 years ago. It was a dance. Left hand here, right foot there. Twist. Drop. She moved. She dropped from the ceiling, landing on her hands in a handstand, precisely placing her palms on the 2 4-inch safe zones between the pressure plates. She lowered her legs, contorting her body through a gap in the laser grid that was barely 18 inches wide. She moved like liquid, flowing through the invisible death trap. She reached the server room door. It required a retinal scan. She pulled a small, high-resolution photograph from her pouch, a photo of the previous head of IT, a man long since retired. She held it up to the scanner. The machine word, confused by the lack of depth, but the high-quality print fooled the outdated sensor. Access granted. The door hissed open. The server room was deafening, filled with the roar of cooling fans and the frantic blinking of thousands of LEDs. Zoya moved to the main console. As she predicted, Taehyun's biometrics had been purged. Junho was the sole admin. She ignored the keyboard. She knelt under the console and pried open a maintenance panel, revealing a tangle of thick-colored wires. The analog overrides. The break glass in case of fire system. She pulled a pair of insulated wire cutters from her vest. Time to wake up the dragon, she whispered. Upstairs, outside the boardroom doors, Taehyun counted the heartbeats. The tension was unbearable. Inside, the murmurs of agreement were growing. The capos were buying the lie. They were preparing to pledge loyalty to the usurper. Suddenly, the air pressure in the hallway changed. A deep, resonant thrum echoed through the building's steel skeleton. The lights died. Absolute darkness swallowed the hallway. A second later, emergency klaxons began to blare, a harsh, rhythmic whooping sound. The darkness was replaced by the ominous, pulsing glow of red emergency strobes. The heavy magnetic locks on the stairwell doors and elevator shafts slammed shut with the sound of dungeon gates closing. Thud, thud, thud. The building was sealed. The trap was sprung. Inside the boardroom, panic erupted. Chairs scraped against the floor. Voices rose in confusion. Taehyun didn't wait. He stepped back and kicked the double mahogany doors right below the lock mechanism. Wood splintered and groaned. He kicked again, pouring all his rage into the blow. The doors burst open. The scene inside was a tableau of frozen terror bathed in strobing red light. 20 high-ranking lieutenants were half out of their chairs. Junho was standing at the head of the table, clutching a champagne glass, looking toward the door like a deer caught in headlights. When he saw the figure standing in the doorway, clad in black tactical gear, a rifle raised, bathed in the color of blood, he dropped the glass. It shattered on the marble floor, the sound swallowed by the claxons. "T'as-vu?" Junho whispered, the name barely audible. "No, you're dead. I saw." Taehyun didn't speak. He stepped into the room. He was no longer the man in the Italian suit. He was the consequences. The lieutenants, seasoned criminals who had survived street wars and prison riots, looked at him and knew instantly that this was over. They didn't draw their weapons. They raised their hands, backing away from the table, distancing themselves from Junho as if he were radioactive. Junho's personal bodyguards, 4 men hired for their size rather than their loyalty, fumbled for their weapons. Taehyun moved. The 416 Hong Kong dollars barked, short, controlled bursts. Fut-fut! Fut-fut! It wasn't a fight. It was an execution. The 4 guards dropped before they could fully raise their guns, eliminated with surgical precision. Taehyun marched down the length of the long table, ignoring the cowering Kapos. His eyes were locked on Junho, who was stumbling backward, knocking over his chair, trying to put the heavy table between them. It was the triads. Junho screamed, his voice cracking, tears streaming down his face, mixing with the snot running from his nose. "They forced me. They threatened to kill me. I had no choice, brother. Please." Taehyun reached the end of the table. He slung the rifle across his back and drew the suppressed pistol Zoya had given him. The movement was slow, deliberate, terrifying. "You forced yourself," Taehyun said, his voice low, cutting through the wailing sirens. "When you decided you could wear my crown. You sat in my chair. You drank my wine. You sold my family." Junho fell to his knees, hands clasped in supplication. "Mercy. Please, Taehyun. Exile me. Send me away. I'll never come back." Taehyun looked down at the man who had sat across from him at dinner hours ago, smiling while planning his murder. He felt nothing. No anger. No sadness. Only cold necessity. "The contract," Taehyun said, raising the pistol, "is closed. 2 shots. Fut! Fut! 1 to the chest. 1 to the head." Junho collapsed backward, his eyes wide and staring at the ceiling, the red emergency lights pulsing in his dead retinas. Silence fell over the room, heavier than the sirens. Taehyun looked around at the remaining lieutenants. They were on their knees, heads bowed to the floor in submission. The king had returned. Taehyun reached up to his ear and tapped the comms bead. "Clean up on aisle 5, he said, his voice flat. Zoya's voice crackled back in his ear, slightly breathless, laced with adrenaline and grim satisfaction. "Did you get the stain out?" Taehyun looked at the body of his former second-in-command. "The carpet is ruined, but the stain is gone. Copy that. Unlocking the elevators now. Meet you in the lobby. Try not to get shot by the holdouts on the way down." "Same to you, Ghost." 20 minutes later, the lobby of the tower was a quiet scene of carnage. The private security guards Junho had stationed there, men loyal only to the highest bidder, had been neutralized. Zoya was leaning against the marble concierge desk, casually wiping down her rifle with a silicone cloth. She had a small cut above her eyebrow, and her tactical vest was scuffed, but otherwise, she looked untouchable. The elevator doors chimed and opened. Taehyun stepped out. He had shed the tactical vest and the helmet, dressed now only in the black combat shirt and trousers. He was covered in dust and sweat, and his eyes were hard, but the tension in his shoulders had broken. He walked across the lobby, stepping over the debris of the firefight, his eyes fixed on her. The remaining staff cowered behind the reception desk, terrified. He stopped inches from her. The air between them crackled. They had survived. They had won. 20 million, he said, his voice rough with exhaustion and something else, something hotter. Wired to your Zurich account immediately, plus the 5 for the initial extraction. Zoya nodded slowly, sliding the rifle into the duffel bag at her feet. Pleasure doing business with you, Kim Tae-hyun. You pay promptly. I like that in a client. She zipped up the bag and slung it over her shoulder. She turned toward the revolving glass doors, toward the snowy Chicago night and the anonymity she craved. Zoya! She stopped, her hand on the glass door. She didn't turn around immediately. The contract is done, Tae-hyun said. He took a step closer to her back. But I have a new position opening up. She turned slowly, raising an eyebrow. A faint smile played on her lips, softening the hard lines of her face. I told you I'm expensive, and I don't do retainers. I am freelance. Tae-hyun reached out. He didn't grab her this time. He placed his hand gently on her shoulder, his thumb brushing the collar of her combat shirt near her neck. The touch was electric, possessive, and terrifyingly intimate. I don't want a freelancer, he said, his dark eyes boring into hers, stripping away the mercenary facade. I need a partner. Someone who can't be bought by the Chinese or anyone else. Someone who knows where the bodies are buried because she helped me bury them. Someone who can run an empire beside me, not just clean up after it. Zoya looked at the Korean Mafia boss. She saw the blood on his hands, the ruthlessness in his eyes, but also the profound loneliness of a man standing at the top of a mountain of corpses. She saw the man who had nodded at her note instead of panicking, the man who had fought beside her in the kitchen. That sounds dangerous, Tae-hyun, she whispered, leaning slightly into his touch. Sounds like a permanent position. Those have a high turnover rate in your line of work. He smiled, a real smile that reached his eyes, transforming his frightening face into something breathtaking. I'll double the rate, he promised. And I still owe you dinner. Zoya dropped the duffel bag. It hit the marble floor with a heavy thud. She reached up, her hand cupping the side of his face, her thumb tracing the scar on his cheekbone where the glass had cut him hours ago. Deal, she said. She pulled his face down to hers. The kiss was not gentle. It tasted of adrenaline, copper, gunpowder, and survival. It was a seal on a contract written in blood, a partnership forged in fire. Outside, the snow continued to fall, blanketing the city in white, hiding the sins of the night, as the ghost and the king began their reign.